Hey there and welcome to Concierge Medicine Radio, your source for actionable advice and real stories of physicians running and growing concierge practices. For more interviews and notes on today's show, please visit conciergemedicineradio.com and enter your email. Now, let's join your host, Taylor Pearson.
We're here today with Dr. Kershisnik of Vantage Physicians in Olympia, Washington. Dr. Kershisnik and Vantage Physicians have been practicing direct care in the Olympia area since 2006. She is a self-described bread and butter provider that has found her way into her practice by following the patients and what is best for them. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Kershisnik.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, why don't we start off with you just telling us a little bit about yourself, maybe a very brief background of how you got into medicine in general, and then more specifically how you got into your current practice.
Oh, okay. So from my freshman year of high school, I knew that I wanted to be a doctor. And I don't come from a family with much of a medical background. It's a bunch of preachers and teachers. And so in my mind, being a doctor just meant being sort of the quintessential family doctor. And so even as I embarked upon medical school, that was always my focus towards primary care. And I never really wavered from that. I went to medical school on the East Coast and graduated in 1995. And for your older listeners, they might realize that is the time when managed medical care was really high-flying. I would go to family practice meetings, and they would say, "Oh, we're family doctors. We are going to rule the world. We will be the gatekeepers. Everything will have to come through us." And by the time I graduated from residency in 1998, that had kind of begun to disintegrate into, oh my goodness, there's so much paperwork. Everything our patients do requires a different form, and spending time on the insurance company, and capitation was already starting to kind of fade away and go back to this sort of fee-for-service scramble where if you didn't see 24 or 25 patients a day, you weren't even covering your overhead, let alone making your income. And so there was this really just rapid swing just during my training period. And so out of residency, I went to work for a large multi-specialty clinic. After 2 years there, the multi-specialty clinic just imploded. They had made some bad choices having to do with managed medical care, and risk-bearing contracts kind of took them down. And the group of 4 physicians that I was with purchased the practice, and so I was in private practice then for about 3 years. And again, just on the treadmill, on the hamster wheel that you hear doctors talk about, trying to provide more care, being a popular physician with a long waiting list, but not feeling like I had the time with my patients to provide the kind of care that I knew they needed. And so what happens with that is the only way that you can be a more profitable physician, which some may or may not equate with successful, is to provide a lower standard of care, spend less time with your patients, limit them to one problem per visit, etc. It is not a satisfying vision of the future. And so it was about that time that my partner and I began to hear about different innovative medical practice designs. And one of the doctors that I worked with went to a meeting. It was called the Association of I think Concierge Physicians or something at that time. I can't remember. And he met Dr. Garrison Bliss, who has been very instrumental in promoting direct primary care in Washington State. And from there, it was a couple years transition. But like you said, by 2006, I was in a direct medical practice and really haven't looked back since then. That was a very long-winded answer to a fairly short question. Sorry.
Tell us exactly how you made the transition. So you said one of your partners went to a conference, and then y'all kind of picked up the next day and changed everything, or what exactly did it look like? Did you inform your patients, or how did it work?
Well, we started some initial conversations with Dr. Bliss and his partner, Dr. Mitch Carton, at the time. And they were beginning to kind of start a consulting business, helping people get started with these practices on the side. And we spoke with our lawyer for the corporation, and we were just on the verge of getting ready to transition our practice and had started crafting some of these documents when he had said, cease and desist. This is a time where there's a lot of legal uncertainties for these types of practices. So it really was about 2 years of thinking about this, mainly because of the legal climate. Once the legal climate became a little bit more amenable in Washington State to these types of practices, we continued to work with Dr. Bliss and Dr. Carton, and also contracted with a consultant to help us navigate with the insurance plans. So our pathway has been extremely conservative. I'd say that we probably are more conservative in how we run our practice than most direct primary care practices that are starting up. We've tried to maintain contracts with as many insurances as possible, but with the understanding that we will bill $0 for all of our services, and so they won't be receiving a billing form from us. And so we've kind of had to, change or sort of adjust the wordings in our insurance contracts, knowing that they will never receive a bill from us. Many practices just starting up simply hang their shingle, don't have any sort of insurance contracts, and will often run into trouble with things like referrals and getting prescriptions approved because they're a complete unknown to the insurance companies. It's much easier if you're transitioning your practice and are still able to use the tax ID number that the insurance companies recognize as who you are. And so the main thing, I think the main take-home message, honestly, is that the relationship of a direct primary care practice to the insurers that will cover our patients is complicated, and I wouldn't think of navigating it without a consultant and a legal team that is specifically knowledgeable in the area of direct primary care.
Was it easy to find the consultant? You said Dr. Garrison Bliss was who you worked with?
Mm-hmm. Back then, there were not that many consulting businesses. We worked with Garrison simply because we liked the way he was running his practice and liked his philosophical approach to direct primary care. Now, if you were to go to the American Society of Concierge Physicians meeting or Direct MD meetings, the meetings are full of people handing out cards that identify themselves as consultants. And I think that it's worth it. I think that they are worth their money because if you start out wrong and you find yourself on the wrong side of your state's particular insurance commissioner or on the wrong side of insurance companies who may dismiss you with cause, it can have downstream consequences that are difficult to get out of.
And what were some of the specific things that, looking back now, you're very glad you had a consultant to help you with?
With some of the some of the specifics in how you set up the finances. So in the state of Washington, and every state is different. This is the important thing to remember, that nothing that I say here is generalizable, I don't think, to every state. Washington State has some very specific laws relating to direct primary care that are on the books, and you can refer to them. And they have very specific directives. So things that I would not have known would be the idea that in our state, the insurance commissioner does not want you to be paid for the care you've provided until after that care has been provided. So my practice, we charge a monthly fee. Some of our patients pay monthly, some pay quarterly, and some pay annually. For these payments, we keep them in a completely separate account, similar to, but not exactly like an escrow account. And then at the end of the month in which service has been provided, we will essentially shave off 1 month's worth of membership fees and transfer that to our active, functioning business account. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. And so having it set up that way, having these sort of two accounts and very careful bookkeeping has been very important. The reason for that is it's to not appear that you are an insurance company. So if I have a patient that pays for a whole year and 3 months in decides to move to Spokane, I can write them a check for the 9 months of unused membership fees and hand that back to them, and that money was never even in my active bank account. It was just there waiting for them to use it. And so that's one of the important ways to be above board. The other thing I mentioned was still continuing to have a relationship with insurance companies. Most of my patients have insurance. They choose to see me because I provide a different quality of service. It's an amenity. And so I need to learn and be able to interact with their insurance companies. And for that reason, everybody knows when you call an insurance company to make a referral or get a prior authorization for a drug, the first thing they ask you for is your tax ID number. And you are recognized by them because of past contracting by that tax ID. And with some insurances, if they don't allow you to contract with them, it's as if you don't even exist. It's as if you don't even have a medical degree. You're just unable to advocate for your patients, and it can be very clumsy and awkward. So that's the other important thing.
So you've maintained your relationship with the insurance companies purely for referrals, is that right?
Exactly, so that I can continue to be an advocate for my patients who have insurance. And I will be honest, not all, there are HMO type of plans that are still out there, and they don't work well with us at all. And we've had to actually turn some patients away because of the type of insurance that they have, knowing that we're really not going to be able to be their physician in the fullest way possible.
What are some of the other challenges you faced, both in the process of transitioning and in the last couple of years as you've kind of already been fully transitioned?
Mm-hmm. I think that the things that people talk about across the board when I've gone to conventions for direct primary care is the idea of marketing. What works? When you're a standard physician in a standard practice, your name is on a list of providers. Somebody gets their shiny new insurance plan, they go to the list, they go, oh, I know that person, and then they make an appointment. So there's really not a big emphasis in primary care on having to market yourself to the patients. They just come to you through the insurance company. Well, in a concierge practice or in direct primary care, should you take out an ad in the paper? Should you have a TV spot or a radio spot? What works? What gets people in the door? And the answer, honestly, is word of mouth. You may transition a small group of patients from your original practice, which is probably the easiest way to start, or you may, show up new in town and visit the Chamber of Commerce, shake a lot of hands. I think that's a much harder way to get started. But it's all about the product that you're delivering. If you don't keep your promises and you're not the kind of provider that generates good word of mouth, you're going to have a real big difficulty, no matter how pretty your website is or how many ads in the newspaper you take out. And that's been frustrating because people want to throw money at the problem. How do we get people in the door? Let's buy more ads. And across the board, people will say that it simply doesn't pencil out. You don't get a good return on investment with that approach.
Well, how did you convince patients to move with you when you transitioned your practice?
Well, we sent out a letter, and we tried very much to stay positive. Most people don't like to hear how broken the system is or how unhappy you are. They want to hear about what's going to be great about your new practice, what's in it for them. And so we really emphasized same-day appointments, longer appointment times, a physician who is relaxed and happy and ready to help you, all of those things that we all have heard about, direct primary care. And we set our price definitely, I think, lower than many because we're not in a a real booming economic area. I think we're kind of on the bleeding edge for the size of community that can handle a direct primary care practice. And I would say 1% of our practice, maybe 1 or 2% of our practice followed us. That was really, really scary. It was a big leap. In a more urban, affluent demographic, I think that physicians who are transitioning their practice may be much more viable right out of the get-go. But we struggled for a good 2 years before we were reliably covering our overhead and then starting to pay ourselves.
So for those 2 years, what did you do to build up the practice? You said word of mouth, but were you promoting that at all? Were you doing like educational seminars at the practice, visiting patients in their homes, anything like that?
Well, we do house calls as part of the practice. There was a story in the local newspaper that generated a lot of phone calls. We actually got very involved with the Chamber of Commerce early on, visiting groups of professionals. There's different chambers of commerce have different things, but there are things called leads groups where you're with a smaller group of professionals, generating leads for one another. That was very much outside of my comfort zone, but I think it was an important part of at least just getting visibility early on. We sent letters to local specialists describing our level of care and asking them to think of us if they had patients that were looking for new primary care providers. That was actually surprisingly low yield, but we tried it. And it really was, neighbors and friends and family members and coworkers of our existing patients that were sort of just slowly trickling in. There was never a moment where suddenly we got a lot of patients. We just kept kind of chipping away at it and being patient. I would have to say if somebody's thinking of transitioning their practice and they're uncertain of how many of their existing patients are going to be following them, you have to be financially sound, and you can't have a lot of debt. You can't have an expectation for a certain lifestyle. You should expect a lean couple of years before things really get going, or it may not be worth making that leap.
Some people kind of overhype the benefits, so it's good to hear kind of your story and exactly what your experience was really like.
And again, I would emphasize the fact that, I live in Olympia, Washington, and in the midst of starting my practice, we had a huge economic downturn, and it's an economically depressed area. And so I think my colleagues who are practicing in the Seattle area or the Portland area have a very different experience. So one of the things that consultants do for you is they look at your patient demographics, and they look at the economy in the area where you live, and they may say, you're golden, or they may say, you might just want to keep, slaving away at what you're doing. If they're a good consultant, they're going to give you an honest answer about that.
And how would you judge a good consultant from a bad one?
I guess you'd probably want to talk to you'd want to ask for a list of other clients, and not just look at their websites, but actually talk to them and get their perspective. I don't think if there's a consultant who wouldn't give you a client list, that would probably be a good person to stay away from. So I should mention there are different types of consultants. The ones that I used early on, they were simply there to here's the forms you should have, here's the legal issues you should consider, here's a sort of budget calculator for determining what you should charge, and those kinds of things. There are some consultants that are really more like MDVIP. They're more of a franchise. They say, we will set you up, and the only cost to you is a percentage of your earnings for X number of years. So there's a little bit less of an upfront risk. Those have their pros and cons, I would guess.
And do most consultants help you with the marketing piece, or is it more the business setup piece?
Well, our consultants were purely on the business side of things. There are many consultants, however, that really they do want to be kind of all inclusive, I guess I would say, and so they're gonna help with the marketing. And I guess my caution would be for this that if they're asking you to spend a ton of money on radio spots and newspaper spots, they may not be using your dollars wisely. But if they're helping you, have a good web presence and a polished website, then that I think is very much worth the money.
So you found that web marketing is a lot more effective or a lot more cost effective than traditional print media or traditional forms of advertising?
By miles and miles. In fact, this is actually a change that I've noticed since we started our practice. So, everybody was on the internet in 2006, but now it's understood that if you're looking for a plumber, you're going to go to Google yourself a plumber, and you're going to type in best plumber in Olympia and see what Google shows you. And so you need to have somebody that's doing web optimization for your practice, because almost all of our sort of cold call new patients these days, they're finding us on the web. And that's a new thing, I think, just in the last year or two. And so we've put a little bit of money into web optimization, and I think it's really paid off.
And what when you say web optimization, what specifically are you doing?
Well, you're talking to somebody who knows more about computers than you, and they're helping make sure that in the subtext of your website that you are going to trigger words that are commonly used in a web search, let's say a Google search. So, best doctor in Olympia, we come up top of the list. Family doctor, adult medicine, pediatrics, Lacey doctor. So we just kind of thought of all of the possible words that we want our website to trigger when somebody does a search like that. And then you have a Facebook page, and you post meaningful content so that there are more links and hits on your website as well. So that seems to help.
And what kind of content are you posting on Facebook?
Oh, health department alerts. Hey, don't forget to get the sunscreen. It's going to be a hot one this weekend. All of those kind of just things. Nothing that has to do with actual patient care. Nothing, that identifies patients, obviously. And it's a business site. It's not a personal Facebook profile.
Right. No one wants to see what you ate for lunch.
Yeah, nobody wants to see a picture of that.
If you were in the process of making the transition to concierge care, or you're making this process and there's a lot of questions coming up, and some of these you alluded to a consultant could help with, like how to structure the business or how to market effectively, how to get new patients, where do you kind of turn to for that information?
Well, right now, I still have a relationship with our initial consultant. I don't pay her a retainer fee. She just sort of has an hourly rate, and if I run into a snag with an insurance company specifically, then I go back to Joan, and she, learns with us, and we sort of walk through it together. If I had a significant legal issue, or if I needed to, say, update my patient contracts, at this point I would probably go and have to find new legal counsel. And there's a in the Seattle area, there's a lawyer that I know that works with concierge practices at Foster Pepper, and so I would probably want to contract with legal counsel. There are lots of newsletters and at least 2 professional organizations for direct primary care now that are just sort of like newsy things. So I'll read the little web newsletters for trends or ideas for improving your practice in direct primary care.
And what newsletters are those?
I don't know if I know how to pronounce his name. Tetrault, Michael Tetro.
Yes.
And he puts out a wonderful newsletter that I really like.
Okay. Stepping back a little bit here, what are some of the common mistakes you see physicians make transitioning to concierge or direct pay care?
The most troubling trend in my sort of community or in Washington State is the impression that nobody's watching, that you don't have to worry about Medicare, you don't have to worry about the insurance commissioner. It's kind of a Wild West city. And, there's so much going on in healthcare right now with healthcare reform and the state healthcare exchanges that actually, the Office of the Insurance Commissioner is probably a little distracted right now. So, you might be able to get by with that for a while, but eventually somebody is going to notice practices that are not abiding by the letter of the law, and it may, kind of give direct primary care a bad name, or worse yet, Medicare may decide to, exercise their right to prosecute physician practices. I should mention that, when I started this practice, it's very important to opt out of Medicare. And you have to opt out every 2 years, because if you don't, you'll be automatically opted back in. And it is a punishable offense. I'm not sure, it might even be a criminal offense to bill patients directly who also have Medicare unless you have opted out. And so I see physicians billing the insurance companies, but then also charging patients an access fee, quote unquote. And in the state of Washington, following the letter of the law, that is an illegal behavior. And so that's something. That's why it's so important to understand the laws in your particular state, because you can do something that seems entirely reasonable, perfectly sane, and find yourself on the wrong side of the law. So that's what I mean when I say I'm extremely conservative. So just to highlight the differences, in the state of California, it's illegal to practice the way I do. You have to bill insurance. You're allowed to charge an access fee if you're providing an additional service, but you have to bill insurance. And in the state of Washington, it's completely the opposite. So you can't just kind of do what you think is right and come up with something that makes sense.
Looking forward, then, what do you see as the direction concierge care is going to go? Where do you think it will be in 5 or 10 years from now? What role do you think it will play kind of in the overall picture of healthcare?
Yeah. There is a sort of a growing division amongst direct primary care practices. There are practices like myself who are charging what I think is a reasonable monthly fee, providing good bread and butter care, but that's accessible to a wide range of socioeconomic groups. There's another sort of higher end, what would more typically be considered concierge care, that's charging high dollar for what's felt to be sort of premium care. And then there's another group of practices like Q Lions here in Washington State that are really trying to find, what's the least we can charge the patients, and can we actually try working again with a third-party payer? So I think that there will be a division. You'll probably either have to be going back to looking for, like Q Lions is, looking for some way to interact with a third-party payer, which essentially may be kind of reinventing capitation again, versus really styling yourself as a high-end, more amenity-driven practice. And so I think it'll go in both of those ways. I think that eventually direct primary care may wind up reinventing a capitated managed care system, hopefully one that's better for doctors and patients than the way that it was in the 90s. And then there will still always be that kind of premium access concierge-style practice. And then there's me in the middle. I would love to know where I'm going to be in 5 years.
How do you think that will be in relation to the overall picture of healthcare in the U.S.? Like, what portion of healthcare do you think will be concierge, either in the sense of the kind of high-ticket premium service, or more along the lines of your model?
That'll be interesting. Everybody is studying this practice style very carefully, wondering if we're a threat to the status quo. And I think the answer to that will always be no. I'm hoping that there will still be heterogeneity in the medical delivery systems, because not everything works for every patient. If I had to pick a number out of a hat, I'd probably follow that good old 80-20 rule. I imagine that 80% of patients will still be in traditional third-party payer insurance-based systems, and maybe 20% will find themselves, working to be in a practice that suits their needs in a different way.
So that would still be a tremendous amount of growth for Concierge then, if you're looking at 20% of the U.S. population. So let's say that's 60 million people. That's a very large market.
I think that's possible, because I think with the changes in the Affordable Care Act, more people will have insurance, but this intense stress on the medical infrastructure, I think, will make the traditional doctor's office a less and less hospitable environment, and I think it may prompt more people to look for alternatives. And that's one of the things that we've noticed already is just a few more calls from just refugees from traditional medical practices.
If you could say only one thing to physicians considering moving into concierge practice in the process, or having just made the transition, what would you say is your number one piece of advice? Or what do you wish you'd known when you were in that same stage?
I think if I had known how difficult the first couple of years were, where I am now, how much I enjoy my practice, I would still have gone through that challenging time. It is absolutely worth it. But the important thing to remember is that for most endeavors in life, the greatest reward does constitute the greatest risk. I feel like I've come out on the right side of that equation, but you can't expect an uninterrupted income stream. You can't expect the patients to just find you or to have a consultant do it all for you. You really need to realize you're going to have skin in the game, and that you need a nest egg, and you need to be prepared for some lean years.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kershisnik. That was super interesting and super valuable. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
I think probably the best way for me would be email ekk@vantagephysicians.net.
Okay, and we'll put a link to your website up on the post when this goes live, so people can find you through there as well.
That sounds great. Or they can just Google Best Doctor in Olympia.
Or they can just Google Best Doctor in Olympia. Yes, we might have made the link just so they can Google Best Doctor in Olympia. All right, well, thank you very much, Dr. Kershisnik. Hey guys, this is your host, Taylor Pearson. To give you a little background on the show, after seeing my dad and sister, both physicians, struggle to find a good resource for how to transition from their traditional practices, I launched Concierge Medicine Radio to create a resource to help physicians and healthcare professionals launch, run, and grow patient-centered direct pay or concierge practices. If you enjoy the show and want to help us spread the word to other physicians and healthcare professionals, it really helps us out if you'll leave a review on iTunes. I know the iTunes interface is a little clunky to say the least, so we put together a quick guide on how you can leave us a review at conciergemedicineradio.com/review, or you can go to conciergemedicineradio.com and click Spread the Word.
Thanks for joining us today at Concierge Medicine Radio. If you found today's show valuable, we'd love it if you spread the word by leaving us a review on iTunes or sharing it with your friends. To see notes on today's show, please visit us at conciergemedicineradio.com. While you're there, leave us your email to hear about all upcoming episodes.